Your host sitting in for Jagenda Semakula, who is actually in Kololo on official duty and will be joining us later. Now with me in studio is Comrade Dan Rugarama, the chairman of the Pan-African Movement Uganda chapter. You welcome and pleasure being with you on this Friday.
Good morning everybody, wherever you may be watching us from, and good morning to you, Comrade Akor, and the UPC fraternity.
Yes, how has been the week?
Oh, punctuated with so many things, and I think top on the agenda is the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which I hope we are going to diverge into. But there are a number of other continental and local issues which probably time allowing we can go into, but God has been good.
Yes, next to Dan, that is on my extreme left, is Ndugu Mututa James, fellow panelist on the Pan-African Friday. You're welcome, James.
Yeah, thank you, Cole, and thank you all those who are following us on the set, but also on other social media within the country and beyond. And I say welcome to all those who are following us.
Yeah, how has your week been?
The week has been okay. We have been having a number of course, things in this particular week. Mm-hmm. We had the launch of the parish model by the president.
That was last Saturday.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And then also followed by a number of other issues that have been. Yes, they were celebrating the International Day Wildlife, and we were at the formerly the zoo, and now we call it Awake. And a number of things that really came up, and I was very impressed by even people who are not Ugandans, telling us the biodiversity, the number of species of animals, of birds that we have in this country. And you could be surprised to find that Uganda alone could be having some of the species that are half of the population in the world, or even more.
We're actually number one when it comes to birds.
Exactly, but these are some of the things that Ugandans themselves don't know, like, that even it comes to tourism, many Ugandans have never toured their country. They don't know where the Queen Elizabeth National Park is, they don't know where Makshan Falls is, but they sometimes read. So it becomes even examinable, ironically.
Well, of course, we shall be, sometime later, we shall also be looking at the tourism potential of Africa, and perhaps why most African countries have really not benefited from this. Now, going straight to our topic, we are looking at Africa and the Russia-Ukrainian war. The war in Russia, the war in Ukraine, where does it leave Africa, and perhaps how should really Africa behave in this particular situation? You remember during those days of the Cold War, yes, Africa became a punching bag that perhaps regimes that were really seen to be associating with one bloc or the other, they would find themselves being, the regimes would either be overthrown, or you'd find that the leaders would actually be unceremoniously assassinated. So let's begin with Dan, the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. Where does it leave Africa? How should Africa behave?
I should first hinge myself against probably a perception from our viewers that in the Pan-African movement we are probably warmongers, we are maybe aligned to socialism and that kind of thing, because Pan-Africanism has been looked at, and I think given its genesis from the lenses of socialism and communism. Reason being that the frontliners of Pan-Africanism were actually fighting quote-unquote capitalism. So I wanted to first put that one aside and make it clear. Because this debate, Ndugu Akol, is a rather high-level debate. We are looking at the global dynamics. We are looking at the global strategic, geostrategic importance of certain geographical locations to others. And I will not come here to pretend that I am discussing fire is better than water.
Or education is better than wealth.
So this
is better than money.
Sometimes here you have got to become, if not at all times, because there is when one wants to be politically correct, and then you are not yourself. But the point I'm really making is that when we get into debates of this nature, and you are honest, you are intellectually honest, then you are bound to step on some people's egos. And therefore, some of these perceptions must be put aside, and we get a honest conversation. Now, historically, Ukraine was part of the bigger Russian Empire.
That is the Soviet Union.
Later, there was such a thing as the Russian Empire, the huge thing before we even got into. Then later, of course, there came it was emphasized into
USSR.
the USSR, that huge coming together of so many countries, not just Russia. Of course, the Ukraine was there. What you have now as Georgia, what you have there as even Poland was part, and so many other Belarus and what have you. All these other countries, as you see, if you can get the map, I hope our producer will maybe give us the map now, current map. But it gives you the impression of this huge land mass that we are talking about.
That was actually seated on two continents, in Asia and Europe.
Thank you so much. So there was spheres of influence that because of the interests that were globally being manifested by arguably two superpowers, America and then Russia. Russia got into what we call Warsaw Pact, which was in a way, and they of course drew the geographical boundaries where their area of influence was actually passing. In the same way, America allied with majority Western Europe, and they created the NATO. And of course, it was for purposes of making sure that they contain the influence of the other, so that they can have the mandate to interfere in whoever interferes in their affairs. Now, that statement itself throws us to what we are looking at now. That over time, we realize the influence and the power of Russia weakens, especially around 1990-91, when we get the splinting, the Russia splints, and when it splits up, and we get the present day Ukraine, we get the Georgia, we get all those small, tiny pieces of countries.
Yeah, splitting to about 15 countries, yes.
About 15, around there. So that certainly weakened the influence of Russia. And that's when America started doing things willy-nilly. And of course, with her cousins, Britain, Germany, all these countries, France. But remember, they had gone into what we call the Security Council, and the Security Council, which has 5 permanent members, who virtually rule the world. Because, of course, each with veto power. And I have seen Africa, which you have just brought in here, also recently.
Pushing for that.
Exactly, and for it, it is asking for 2 positions, 2 veto power capabilities. But now, it is not the first time that we have had those superpowers with their influence trying to get into other countries and take over. We have got Russia having unwritten control over majority of those other countries that we talk about, save for Poland and a few other countries around there, which virtually by and large actually were formerly part of the Warsaw Pact agreement, joining NATO. Now, Russia recently, not long ago, went and got a peace, especially after the leader of Ukraine, who was pro-Russia, had been in the so-called, they call it popular uprising within Ukraine,
Had been overthrown.
been overthrown. And then there came our present president, whose job is very well known as a former comedian. I'm not in any way belittling that. It is art. Anybody can come from any profession and rule. But the point I'm trying to make is that the popular leader, whom Russia was comfortable with, because we all know that Ukraine has got, Russia has got majority of its oil pipelines and gas pipelines going through Ukraine. Why? Because Ukraine was part and parcel of Russia. So it was in the best interest, and still is in the best interest of Russia, to have either a neutral leadership in Ukraine or to have an absolute control over Ukraine itself.
Well, if you can hold on to your point, Ndugu Dan, maybe Tumututa, because we see this is how the First World War began, Second World War. So is Putin playing the cards of Kaiser, playing the cards of Hitler, that may plunge this world into another, the Third World War?
Well, of course, all leaders have interests, but also states have interests. Now, when you look at this conflict, you also have to look at it from the background, like Ndugu Rugarama was putting. But also, at the same time, you also look at the individuals that are involved. Sometimes you have a state which has interest, but also you have a person heading that state who also has an interest, because governments are not necessarily the ones that go to war, but the individuals that control the machinery are the ones that influence whether to go to war or not. So when you look at the interest of Russia, like another state, and I also hear what Sanders, the Democrat, was saying, was also arguing that even Americans shouldn't be fooled, because each state exists to influence, to impact influence, both within and outside its spheres. Now, the only problem comes in when those interests are also conflicting. And it's what we're seeing here. That it's true that Russia has had a very big interest in Ukraine. And what happens in Russia is not beginning today. We're also talking about the 2 families that started the kingdom, the leadership of Ukraine and the leadership of Russia. At some point, I think they were like chiefdoms. Apparently, the 2 names that are common in Russia and Ukraine originated from those establishments. But the problem here is that I think there is more to do with the individuals, like I said, that are involved, because President Putin, I think, has taken it a little more personal from the interest of the state. Because if it were the interest of the state, I think there could have been provided valves for mediation and discussion, and they would have agreed. Because the basic interest is that you allow Ukraine to join in NATO, and as Russia, you have your influence and interests curtailed. That is understandable. Now, I'm sure Ukraine may not join NATO now, and maybe the nearby future, given that stake. But also, you also need to look at the people of Ukraine, their interests. It is true that Russia over time has had a number of people who are living in Ukraine. Those who were born there, those who through the expansion program found themselves there and have now become people of Ukraine but of Russian origin. And that is why Crimea was very easy for Putin to, for Russia to annex, because most of the people who are living in that particular area are actually Russians. And to a greater extent that there were, many of them actually, those families were taken there for that purpose. But
no, actually, if you can hold on to your point, were they taken there because, remember, the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s. So these are families that were there before the 90s.
Yeah,
and they acquired property. Secondly, we also see that Russian is one of the official languages in Ukraine until recently, perhaps when the current president of Ukraine decided otherwise. Don't you think that the establishment in Ukraine knowingly or unknowingly was playing dangerous politics?
Not knowingly or unknowingly, but also annoyingly. Because when you look at the removal of President Yanukovych, who was a very popular president. Actually, he put it that he was a very popular president, but you also realize that he was not very popular, because at the same time he was overthrown by the Now, there comes this comedian. By the way, sometimes leadership is funny. Not many people expected that the current president will win an election, first of all, but also that he will sustain such a pressure like now he's subjected to today. But the basic thing is that the interest, I was talking about the interest of the states, but also the interest of the people who live in those states. To the extent that the people of Russia and the people of Ukraine are more or less one
and the same.
Exactly. Of course, what has also come up is that this war is a bit dividing them. But what like I said, it could have been easier if all avenues of discussion were allowed to take place. It would have been an issue, but would have been resolved so peacefully. But I think Moscow thought that it is easier to go full war, and if that happens, we shall be able to have ultimate control, which I think a bit was not well looked at in the implications and the results of because I know a lot is going to come out of that. But that notwithstanding, when you look at the rest of Europe, the issue of expansionism, I think, seems to be very unpopular today, because most of these countries have done it. But today, I think there is a new dimension in terms of influence, that you don't need the hardware, you don't need the fiscal influence, then you don't need that to push people around, excuse me, to create space for yourself. But you can create that space soft, like I was putting it, that you can use soft power to insert and exert your influence over the rest. I think that is what the rest of Europe is looking at. But I think Putin has a problem that he believes in both. And I think that
the carrot and the stick.
yes, and that a bit puts him in a very awkward position. And given what is happening, I know he may win a fiscal war, but he will have lost something. And what we are looking at is that even if you caused a regime change in Ukraine, but you are going to create a bigger problem that you
back at home. Yes, thank you very much, Ndugu Mututa. Yes, back to Comrade Dan. This reminds me of the 1812, the Moscow campaign by Napoleon Bonaparte, where he really also invaded Russia. And the Tsar of Russia said, look here, we are not going to fight Napoleon. But at the end of it all, Napoleon lost more than half of the army, and that was the starting point of the downfall of Napoleon. So are we seeing the events of 1812 now coming to haunt Putin? Because definitely, yes, he may win the war or the battle, as he really, Mututa puts it, but with consequences that actually may either lead to his downfall or again to the further weakening of Russia.
You see, there is something which Ndugu Mututa started with, I mean, towards the end of his submission, and I want to go there. The soft power that he has talked about, soft power has been largely applied by China on majority of the African countries, and it is succeeding. Actually, I think the best example of soft power application is seen in the Chinese way of doing things. Russia has been doing a lot of soft power, especially not just with Ukraine, but talking about Ukraine, you realize that all the presidents since the establishment of Ukraine, all the presidents that have come up in Ukraine, Belarus, for instance, Russia has not gone to occupy any part in Belarus, and save for maybe in Georgia, and the reasons were like we are seeing about 14 years ago, we are seeing in Ukraine. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, there has been a lot of soft power that Russia has applied in the past, so we cannot accuse Russia for not applying soft power or not being diplomatic. But this time around, the spark was on how NATO was quoting the current leadership and giving them motivational speeches to make sure that they wholeheartedly and hasten the speed at which they are moving into the NATO alliance. Now, when that happens, when that was, because of course the Russians have got their troops on the ground, they have got their ears on the ground, they know what is happening. They rushed and annexed
KGB is working.
Absolutely, and you know that the current leader was a former director of KGB in Germany. Actually, he's the one who carved out and maintained Eastern Germany for such a long time. Including even the now current prime minister. Is it the prime minister? Yeah, prime minister, who was the president the other time. You know, they are alternating for purposes of achieving their objectives. That is to bring Russia back on the map. Now, let me also state, lest I forget, that Russia is still suffering from a hangover. They have not come to terms with the reality that there was such a thing as USSR disintegration. And we know whose brain and handwork it was to have USSR disintegrate. Now, when Putin and his right-hand man got into the reins of power in Russia, they embarked on a campaign to revive the USSR.
The reunification.
Absolutely. And that one, there were two options. We either do it through the soft power, which Ndugu Mututa was talking about, and when we feel we have failed there, then we are going to go into military application, and this is what they were doing. They did in Georgia. This is what they have done in Ukraine. They started by bringing that portion. You see, when you look at the map, Crimea is almost like a lonely island. It's just at the sea there. And by taking Crimea, actually 3/3 of the entire Ukrainian coastline was taken. You see? And it is not that, because they have got offshore mining, there is oil, there are other related minerals within that piece of land, including, of course, the strategic importance, geographical strategic importance of Crimea. So they actually, in a way, cut Ukraine from a nerve, economic nerve. So that, therefore, having been done, they realized that America, with her NATO allies, and especially America, and let's be honest about it, was making endless ventures into making sure that they bring Ukraine into NATO for purposes of bringing the, you'll forgive my language, I will call it espionage, because they wanted to closely spy on Russia. And Russia,
on Moscow, what is going on?
Absolutely. They wanted to be close to see what is actually happening in their enemy camp. Now, Russia is a member of the Security Council. It has got veto power. It has allies. I can assure you that China can keep quiet and play neutral like we have done, and we give excuses that we are now incoming chair of the non-aligned movement. What is non-aligned? At the end of the day, a neutral position is a position. You see, if there are two issues to be voted against, and we claim this is bad, this is good. Now, for you, where are you? You say, me, I'm neutral. Then certainly you have taken a position.
And Martin Luther has always been very clear that when you take a neutral position in times of conflict,
then
you are siding with the oppressor.
Absolutely.
With the oppressor.
So
that's how it is. That's what. So in this particular case, it means that the more than 30 countries that
the 34 countries which abstained. I will tell you, they are part of they are like, no, but we understand Russia's position.
Yes.
But you see, let us not say it loudly.
Yes.
I don't want to be the official spokesperson. I'm just an analyst, and I'm giving my views. I can assure you that all those who took a position of neutrality are actually not neutral. But they just simply don't want to say it loudly. Now, I hope that America and NATO are also not naive to see that actually what they are trying to, if they were gauging the popularity of their actions, then they now know where the world stands. But I want to say that Russia has made its reasons known to the global world. They have said, we want to achieve the following. Let the influence of NATO with these American viewers not extend beyond what was agreed way before during our time of Warsaw Pact and your NATO creation. We know those spheres. Don't go beyond. After all, we have already made incursions into our sphere, but stop there.
Well, and I also see President Putin is actually spot on by maybe you can say unmasking, or perhaps opening the old skeletons. Yes. Unveiling the old skeleton, say why in the first place did you overthrow Saddam? Where are the nuclear weapons?
Actually,
and he also talked about Libya. Why did you what was the problem with Gaddafi? So you find that through this one, he's indirectly quoting Africa and also quoting the Arab world.
This topic which you have brought is such a huge thing, but we can only try in the time allotted to us to say just a few things. The truth of the matter is, if we are going to talk about aggression, like Ndugu Comrade Putin has been called an aggressor,
yes.
Then I think it is the case of a pot telling the kettle that you are behind is black. And that becomes extremely funny, because the majority of the aggression in the last 40 to 50 years has been done by America.
Well, I think very much. Yes, Comrade Mtuta, let's get to Africa, because now let's look at Africa, because you remember when George Bush Jr. was actually invading Iraq, he had one message for Africa, that you're either with us or with the enemy. There's nothing like neutrality. Now let's get to this. Where does this really leave Africa? Because even we see some countries, just like Comrade Rugarama has put it, have just decided to abstain, because in mind they really have not forgotten the role Russia played in the fight for independence. They have not also forgotten the role Russia played actually in helping most African countries fight neocolonialism and capitalism and imperialism, yes.
I do know that really countries exist, like I said, based on interests. And those interests are only achieved when you have information. And we get this information by spying. That's why we have embassies all over as countries. That's why we have deployments of all different types of...
Or even that's why we have military attaches at embassies.
Yes. Because if you are not going to know what your neighbor has in the house, then you may not know what to do or how to handle that neighbor. Because in the villages where we grow up, when a person points a finger at you, in fact they say you don't have to point a finger at someone, because they say you. Tomorrow that person eats food and develops a stomach upset. They say someone pointed a finger at me. So there is a reason as to why they do that. But I think in the new world, there's a lot that needs to be done as opposed to how it was done in the past. And I'm sure that one of the issues that we are looking on in the world is that this issue of annexation, of occupation and the rest need to be a thing of the past. Whether it is done by superpower, whether it's done by whoever is done it, it should be stopped. Because we should look at our borders protected globally, not by necessarily the individual, to say that we have to build enough of the machinery to be able to deter incursions and attacks from our neighbors or whoever. Because in so doing, Africans are the losers. Because we are going to be buying guns either from Russia or from US or one of the sellers. But at the same time, you look at the human cost that's involved. When you look at the suffering that the people of Ukraine are now going through, and the Russians, because you know they also having issues of their sons who are being killed on the front line, and those who are being displaced. You realize there's a lot in terms of the human cost that is involved. So I think war should be avoided as much at all costs, so that we can engage in diplomacy. And that's why we countries are now promoting a lot of diplomatic relations. We can sort our issues by talking than fighting. Now, unfortunately, when you look at the life of President Putin, has grown from a conflict. Actually, right from his family.
Right from birth.
Exactly. It has been riddled with conflict. And so for him, I think that mentality is with him. But I'm sure if there will be a new president in Russia, maybe things will be tackled differently. Now, when you look at Russia and Africa, the conflict in Ukraine and Africa, first of all, I'm also disappointed that even amidst these bombs falling on cities, people dodging bullets and sleeping outside in the cold, of course the weather is terrible anyway, People still have time,
To go in minuses.
yes, and look at black people and white people. And there's even an idiot I heard saying that he's very, sorry to say that, but he's unfortunate that white people are being killed with blue eyes and whichever, that this war should have been somewhere in Africa
Or Asia.
Or Asia.
Yeah.
Now, you look at that and also think, anyway, let it be there so that they also learn. But war is war. It doesn't have to, and doesn't have to be, that doesn't mean that Africans were the ones who are warmongers or who the ones who are creating conflict. It is unfortunate that actually some of our people are caught up in that war.
Yeah, actually, let's look at Africans who are really caught up in that war, especially African students in Ukraine. There's a report, I don't know how true it is, that whenever efforts of evacuating foreigners, actually Africans are being actually thrown off the trains that are evacuating people, even aeroplanes that had come to evacuate some of the foreigners. Africans have not been given that. So don't you think that the Ukrainians and also perhaps the forces that are supporting Ukraine in one way or the other, they know that Africa could be having a soft spot for Russia? Yes.
They do. They do. But you see, there are no, like I said, there are no there is no pretense that you cannot conceal some of these things. The Western Europe, NATO, and America, they know that although Africa does not say it so loudly, our heart and our sympathies are with Russia, and for historical reasons. We have not forgotten, of course, the part that Russia played in our liberation. We are also, it is not lost on us that Russia never participated in the
colonization of Africa,
administration of Africa, but instead it helped by way of supplying ammunition and also allowing some of its great buddies like Cuba to come onto the African continent and help.
No, even we've seen photos doing rounds of Putin. By then, a young Putin.
Oh, no,
training.
That one is questionable.
Yes.
Actually, that picture is questionable because when you look at the times, they put a time when actually this Putin was at university. Then you wonder, but anyway, Museveni
was at university and also in Mozambique.
So it's possible. It's very possible, although we can debate it. But the point really is, and I think your question is very clear, that it is in the best interest, and any analyst would see it really, that Africa identifies with Russia because Russia never participated in brutalizing us, in colonizing us,
exploiting,
with all the attendant effects of colonialism. Two, they allowed although for them they may not have done it directly, but we all know that the close allies of Russia helped in the physical liberation of Africa, including the defeat of apartheid by Cuba, and we know that Cuba and Russia were and are still together. Now, there is also this aspect that the students in Ukraine, and we have seen
the
media,
black students, yes.
Yes, we've seen in the media, the African students and those not necessarily African by way of where they maybe come from, because we have got a lot of Latin America who are black, and they are not necessarily African, but for us we claim African, we claim them wherever they are in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Being stopped from embarking on the trains and maybe taking flights. But they have since fixed it, and this I think was the Russian way of doing it. Because currently, as I speak, more than 75 to 80% of Ukraine is under the Russian control. So the two states, you see, this is what Russia did. It engineered the rebel outfits. It encouraged the rebel outfits within Ukraine. And for a very long time, by the way, Ukraine has been not one. There are 2 states within Ukraine, save for Crimea, which was directly taken over and the referendum carried out. 2 states within Ukraine that Russia recognized as independent states, but it is within Ukraine. Now, Russia, in conjunction with those rebel outfits, where Russia has already deployed its own army, and you remember they had even amassed more than 200,000 armed strong men to the teeth surrounding the entire Ukraine. So they have now been allowing, and I think because of the statement that came from African Union to the Ukrainian government and the powers that be, they have now allowed the students of the African descent and the Africans to leave to the neighboring countries, Poland and etc. and etc. But it gives us a signal that Africans, in the eyes of even a suffering white man, we are looked at as
the problem.
Subhuman. That if anybody was to die, and I think that statement came, if you were watching some of these TV things, the statement came that if there were anybody to die, then it should be the Africans
And
to die.
or Asians.
Even when it is not our own.
Yes.
You see, but they have a feeling that it should be us to die and not them. And what therefore happens is that when you get a white man in Putin and his brothers and sisters who see value in us without necessarily wanting to take something of value from us, identifying with us and helping our cause, we have got every reason under the sun to support such a person, either morally or otherwise. So I want to state, therefore, by way of concluding on that, that what Russia is doing in Ukraine, if Ukraine at this material time, because I have given you, there were 3 reasons, I had mentioned 2, and maybe the 3rd one is that they want Ukraine not to join NATO. Now, if today they are satisfied that actually Ukraine is not going to join NATO, and these other 3 major objectives have been achieved, then I want to believe that Russia is going to withdraw from. But these threats of Russia, you are not on SWIFT, which is a system allowing money transfers
Yes.
that we are going to freeze your...
No, not going to freeze. The freezing is
frozen.
on.
no,
Yes.
you see, it is in stages, because what Gund was saying, for instance, we know Abramovich is owning Chelsea. Has Chelsea been freezed? They are still there. So there are many, there are a number of businesses. You must take time to identify them. Identify the businesses of Russia. And what they did, I think, was on just money, the money economy, making sure that they make you uncomfortable. Then your money also loses value in one way. But you see, we are all, at the end of the day, we have not sat down to listen to this analysis. Because there is another system, not necessarily SWIFT, which allows money transfers and exchange. It was created by China and Russia. Now, because for us, we are English-oriented, and the media we are exposed to, the social media and mainstream news is Euro-centric in nature, then we
Western.
get a feel, yes, Western for that, but we get a feel that what we see on TV, CNN and BBC, and what we see on WhatsApp and other related social media is necessarily the correct version. For instance, let me say this as I conclude. It has been discovered that majority of what we have been seeing on social media in terms of the atrocities being committed by Russia, then
Even
also
the casualties.
yeah, absolutely.
on
Then you
the
see
Russian.
then also the ability that the Ukrainian government has been shooting down the majority of them were actually simulations which were in a film being shot, and others were just created. And they have that kind of information has been debunked. So we must be very careful now as the kind of information which we consume. We must be very careful and be able to discern. But at the end of the day, let us not demonize Russia. I may not support.
If you can stop, you
Yes.
can hold it there. Yes, Ndugu Mtuta, the issue of demonizing and isolation of Russia. Where
No,
does this leave
For
Africa?
me, I of course, I don't support Russia, and neither do I support Ukraine. But we are looking at facts as they are.
He's non-aligned.
Because whether today, and last time people in parliament were trying to be politically right by trying to say whether we should condemn Russia. I think that was the intention. But at the end of it, even if you condemned Russia today, your condemnation is not going to stop a bomb from falling on a building.
No. In this particular incident in Russia, it is reminding me of the incident in Libya when Ndugu Kanwama Gaddafi was overthrown. That most of the Africans, their condemnation is just from the lips, but deep in their hearts.
Yeah, so but even
they are
that
saying
one,
something different. That
one of the lips to me doesn't add up, because I believe in doing things from a logical point of view, not emotional. Because whether you supported them, or like President said, I think he's the one who made the statement that when Gaddafi was actually killed, he thought there could be a way of intervention.
By fellow Africans.
Exactly.
They had created a no-fly zone.
So that was the most important thing that we should have done as Africans, because much as either we hated or liked Gaddafi, that was not a problem. But now there's something, a situation that we will have addressed. Now, when you look at this issue of Russia and Ukraine again, for me, I believe the only safer place for the African is Africa. And wherever Africans are, they are not safe until the Africa itself has to create a safety haven for its people, both within and outside of Africa. For whatever reasons, be it in Europe, be it in America, be it in Asia, even in China, now we are looked at as people, other people. And like he said, if there is any person to die, it should be the African.
Or an Asian.
Or an Asian.
Yes.
So, and the thing has a lot of history, and maybe it's not stopping today. Now, and part of the problems that Africa has had is actually its association with Russia. You remember that the problem before he was assassinated, he had tried, many of the Africans actually, the original, the fathers, the founding fathers of Africa.
Of the continent, yes.
Exactly. Had more connections with Africa, with the Russia than even any other country.
And that cost them their careers.
Exactly.
Yes. The ideology.
Yes, and that caused them trouble. Most of them were killed because of that. Now, but I think Russia has also been either using them or has also been naive, because the intervention when it comes to issues of Africa, I think we have had Russia in the non-aligned movement, but that non-aligned movement also has been a very loose outfit, and much as we have tried to create that solidarity, because I've seen this happen with many of the African countries, but also our friends in our people in Cuba.
Ndugu Mtuta, you can hold it there. We are going in for a short break, and when we come back, we shall look at why ECOWAS is actually among the groups that are really saying yes, Russia should really withdraw from Ukraine immediately. We should also look at why, of course, EAC up to now is yet to make a statement. Also, why really SADC? I don't know. Also, SADC has made a statement. We shall also be interrogating that. Don't go away. Keep it on UBC TV. This is Pan African Friday.
Raising Voices.
I feel happy when my mother spends time with me. I hope all mothers will like my mother. I want my mother to reach out to all mothers. She knows how important it is to be a good mother. I promise to help my mother inspire other mothers to change.
In this time of COVID, what is your promise to the children of Uganda? Because a violence-free childhood is everyone's right. Raising Voices.
It's Freaky Friday from Airtel. Buy or gift. Buy or give.
Get freaky too! Dial star 149 star 10 hash to load a Freaky Friday bundle for you to enjoy the best offers on voice and data.
To buy a bundle for friends and family, dial star 149 star 10 star 5 hash. Freaky Friday with Airtel. Buy or gift a bundle today. Dial star 149 star 10 hash to get started. Airtel, the smartphone network.
It's time to teach. Schools are open. In these days of COVID-19, teachers are not only giving knowledge, but protecting themselves and their students from the virus. As a teacher, you must ensure that students follow the set SOPs of always maintaining a distance of 2 meters from others in classrooms, dormitories, entertainment halls, school vans and playgrounds, wearing a washed and clean mask every day that covers their mouths and noses, and regularly washing their hands with soap and water. In addition to that, you must counsel students about stigma related to COVID-19 and discourage them from violence. Any violence against students from classmates, teachers or parents should be reported immediately to a school administrator or senior woman or man teacher for correction and further guidance. Ensuring everyone's safety is key, so make sure students are out of class by the official closing time. Let's share knowledge, not COVID-19. This message is supported by the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education and Sports, and UNICEF. Stay safe.
National Medical Stores is a government agency mandated to buy, store and distribute medicines and medical supplies to government health facilities in Uganda. For Ugandans that we serve, help us serve you better by taking your individual responsibilities seriously. Report theft of government medicines and medical supplies to the nearest police station or to the State House Health Monitoring Unit. Do not pay for any medicines or medical supplies labeled Government of Uganda, not for sale. Do all that is within your means to stop all preventable diseases, including COVID-19. Continue observing the Ministry of Health Standard Operating Procedures, SOPs, including wearing a face mask whenever you are in public spaces. Visit a designated health facility to receive your COVID-19 vaccination and a booster dose for those that are eligible. Prevention is better than cure. National Medical Stores, passionate about your life.
Welcome back from that short break, and this is Pan-African Friday. Later, we shall be taking you to Kololo, where President Yoweri Museveni is expected to preside over the passing out of prison warders and cadets. Now, back to our topic, looking at Africa and the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. Now, by the time we went for the break, Ndugu Mtuta, let's look at ECOWAS also coming out to say that they really condemn the aggression of Russia on Ukraine, or the invading of Russia. Russia invading Ukraine. And this takes us back to history, because you realize the activities of CIA and FBI were so rampant in West Africa that the first overthrow of governments that we witnessed, the Olympio, that is in Togo, all this happened in West Africa. Actually, in West Africa, there about 80% of the countries have had an underhand influence of the CIA, leading to the overthrow of regimes. And we can also see, again, that ghost resurrecting again in West Africa. So let's look at their position and their historical ties with CIA and then Russia.
Yeah, by the time we went off for the break, I was saying that these countries, the rest of now, whichever conflict has been created in the world, it's like saying the rest of the world against Africa, because you have seen the Africans, I think, marginalized, mistreated all over the continent. But I'm also happy that now the leadership at the African Union seem to be getting more sensitive about the Africans, both home and outside Africa, such that we maybe in the future we will see some enforcement of even if it is hypothetical, that, like I said, even if we also one time said we are going to to impose sanctions on someone for the sake of it, for the sake of having an opinion, I think we rather do that. But in any conflict, like Ndugu Rugama was saying, the truth is the first casualty. But also in modern war conflicts, the propaganda is a very strong tool.
It's part of the war.
Yeah, so
which actually Moscow is losing their own propaganda.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you may, and once you lose it, because propaganda is aimed at depicting you as weak, as bad prepared, as also bad loser, so that whatever happens, a bad thing, you are the one doing it. Now, I think Moscow was not prepared for that, or there was a problem. But it is also possible that...
that's not what Moscow does. Russia never does that kind of propaganda. For them, actually, socialist countries, for them, theirs is achieve our objectives, keep quiet.
But then maybe if I can get to this, because that is how they lost the Cold War, because they did not get into propaganda. The Western world got into propaganda, and before Moscow could know it, the USSR was no more.
Yeah, because
there were invisible hands.
It is very hard to sustain, even at a family level. When a woman runs out of your house shouting that she has been beaten, and your man sitting in the house there, for me, I'm not going. People definitely will come to believe that this man is always a wife beater. So, but now, when you look at what is happening with the rest of the world, that now African blocs are coming up to say whether they support this or they support that one, to me, I think that is also not necessary. Because, like I said, emotionally fine, because you're going to make someone feel happy that I have support somewhere, but that support may not be brought down into a tangible effect that will help you win a war or something. Maybe it will galvanize your support back at home, because that's, again, talking about propaganda is something that Russia, like you said, may not necessarily have to talk about back at home. But you see, the war in Ukraine has also helped to unite the people of Ukraine, but it has also caused a division.
No. Actually, that unity you're talking about is cosmetic, because as Comrade Dan said, Ukraine almost half of the land had already been divided,
yes,
even before the invasion.
So the independent states organized by Russia within Ukraine.
Yes,
now.
true, but this war is making the people of Ukraine look at Russia not as welcome as would have been the case, even with the robots.
That's the propaganda from the Western world, because that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you saw even the other former president who was a very opponent of the current president, coming up to say now we are together. To me, in PR and in propaganda, that is a very strong statement, saying now for purposes of this, because we have been invaded, we are going to be together. That is a strong statement. Now, when you look at what Africans are trying to do, to me, I believe that we should have a single voice. If we are supporting Russia, it should be known that we are supporting Russia because of ABCD. If we believe that Russia should not continue bombarding Ukraine, then we should have a statement to that effect. Now, that should be at the top of the African Union, because as a country, we could, as a person, I could have my own feelings, and a country could have its own thinking because of the president, which is that country. But we need now to make African Union should be worth its name. That the Africans have decided so, because African Union has said so.
No, of course, African Union has condemned the invasion, but individual countries, including Uganda, of course, if I'm to use Honorable Keloriam's words, that we have close ties and working relations with both countries, and therefore we're not going to take sides.
Yeah, for me, that's what I'm saying. That shouldn't be necessary, because we must move as a globe. I mean, as a continent, as African Union. What is our leadership saying, and then we can follow. But also, that notwithstanding, I know Russia is not maybe very famous with the African Union, but also that it has some close ties with particular countries and particular individuals that can be understood. But when you look at what is happening in the rest of Africa, you also realize that the issue of Russia-African relationship is being called. Africans don't want to come out to show the support for Russia, like I said, because of historical reasons. But also some people have been intimidated, and that's why you saw even the voting at the UN. That indicates that some people may be having quiet relationships with Moscow, but they may not be at liberty to come up openly to say, look, this is ABCD, because they fear the ramifications. And that is why, again, when you go back to what the president said some time back about the attack on Libya, that he had talked to President Zuma, said, can we do something? Because actually a fly zone had been imposed
on Libya.
But how do you impose a no-fly zone which you are not implementing?
No, but let's get to this, because
the no-fly zone was imposed by NATO.
The NATO on Libya.
Friends of Libya. They imposed that no-fly zone for purposes of not having any help come either from Africa to go to Libya. Alternatively, to have Libyans, including the president, Comrade Gaddafi, fly out. At the same time, they had their satellite and cameras on whatever activity was happening in Libya. Purpose, total, was to make sure that they achieve the objectives of carrying out the assassination of Comrade Gaddafi and also plundering the resources, which they are still doing, of Libya.
Yeah, because exactly that's what I'm saying.
No, if we can get back to this, because you've talked about the isolation and the sanctions. Because one was wondering that if Comrade Mugabe would survive the sanctions. I think about two decades into the sanctions, he was still
What about,
the big man. Now, what about a country like Russia, really? Do you think these sanctions and isolation
Beautiful question.
are going
But
really
at the same time, like I
weaken
was
them
telling
within a
you,
short time?
that some of these sanctions are not meant to be, but they could be either cosmetic, but also a statement is being made. I can say, a call, I don't want to see you in my home. Not wanting to see you in my home does not stop you from eating and sleeping in your home. But that people know that there's a problem between you and me. Simple. So some of these sanctions, and of course when you are imposing some of the sanctions of a person who you are not accommodating in your house, is not necessary. But it's meant to cause some unnecessary discomfort for you. Even when you are moving in the market, people will say, that guy, you know, is the one they chased from someone who's home, like you don't have your own home. So that is what sanctions are meant to be. How effective sometimes they may or may not be, because sometimes really they can bite when you are not trading, when you are not able to...
Because countries like Germany have actually been depending on cheap
gas,
gas,
Anyway,
cheap and affordable gas from Russia. Now, with
if you will permit me,
yes,
sanctions this is not the first time we have seen sanctions. No. We have had sanctions imposed on independent democracies, globally speaking, for no absolute good reason. We have had sanctions on Cuba for the last 6 decades. All for what? Cuba wanting to be her own self. We have had America occupy Guantanamo Bay.
And it has not stopped Cuba
absolutely
from producing the best doctors
and
in the world.
advancing scientifically. We have had of recent sanctions imposed on Venezuela, including more than 8 direct, covert and overt military operations to overthrow the leadership in Venezuela, which is a democracy, and which America under Trump and Pompeo this time reversed and called a not so much a democracy. They even recognized a man who was beaten on polls, and they persuaded their cousins, the Europeans, also to recognize that man. It is just the input of Cuba and the resilience of the army of Venezuela and the people who said, no, we are going to stay true to our leadership, that even Trump reimposed sanctions on Cuba simply because of the role Cuba was playing in Venezuela to protect her own oil to benefit the people and prevent the exploitative economic conglomerates from America, which were taking a monopoly in use of the oil of the Venezuelans. Point I'm making is one, that we have had sanctions imposed on DPRK, Democratic Republic of Korea. Korea is still thriving. I've been there, you know, several times. I have moved throughout the country and I have taken an observation. I'm not saying that they are living in heaven. No, they have problems. But I can assure you there are very many countries which are not on sanctions, European, American, European sanctions, but cannot compare with DPRK. That DPR, do you know what it takes to develop a nuclear warhead? DPRK now is a nuclear power country. What does that mean? And then we shall claim that they cannot afford to feed their people. Give me a break. Further,
that is the Western propaganda.
Absolutely. This is what we are talking about. Further, there is the sanctions again. We are talking about the sanctions that now we are going to have. Germany itself imports more than 50% of her gas supplies from Russia. Where are they going to meet that deficit? If they continue what they were. I was watching the debate in the German parliament, and they were telling the chancellor that please behave. We know where we are. You know that we destroyed our own nuclear power. Now you cannot lead us into temptation and deliver us to the devil. We must stay true and see how we work out some of these things. Sanctions again. We've had sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe for what? Simply because, may his soul rest in eternal peace, Senior Comrade Robert Mugabe said, no, we must address the land question. For that, he was demonized. And if you asked, and I usually say this, by the way, not pun intended, but this is the truth. You asked an average African that, hey, by the way, these issues of Zimbabwe, they will tell you, no, there was a dictator in Zimbabwe and he ruined his country. Come on. We can't afford to have
Of course, that is the information out there, yes.
So you ask, where do you get that kind of information? You don't watch TV, I saw it on CNN, I saw it on BBC, I read it in the newspaper.
Actually, it is not even for the problems of Africa. It is not even an ordinary African. But we also have seen leadership of Africa who because when these sanctions were being imposed on Mugabe for the, I'm not saying that some of these sanctions are not necessary, but when sanctions were being imposed on Mugabe because he had told the whites to leave some of the land, and they had come up with a plan saying, you have 3 farms, you give 1 farm back, have 1 farm for yourself, then the other farm for business, and then you surrender that 1 farm, 1/3 of the farm.
There was even a plan before that. That was the second phase. The first phase was Britain, yes, these are your people, yes. Now, we do not have land for the natives. Can we compute, you give us money, we as a government get land for our people, and we leave your people here, whom we have naturalized, to go on with their commercial farming. Britain said, yeah, it is okay. We shall look at it and we shall go forth. Did they meet their part of
no, not even.
They didn't.
Not saying looking at it, they even accepted.
Absolutely.
And even rolled out an implementation plan.
And then
eventually ran out of
it. Now, what would Mugabe have done?
So that it should have been, again, for me, I normally have a problem with the leadership in Africa, is that African leadership should have sat down to say, no, this is the problem we have. And I've liked, this guy is not my friend, but I don't know why of late I like him, Malema, because he's saying, if you are a thief, your grandfather was a thief and stole a bicycle and passed it to your father, and the father has passed it on to you. You are all thieves. You're all criminals. So
that's even the maximum in our penal code. You see, a fraud, a criminal offense committed 20 years back, discovered after 20 years, because time does not cure
the criminality,
the defect or the criminal element
and of course this is now the dilemma of Africa, that in most areas, of course, like in Kenya, we can say perhaps they tried to manage it, though again land moved from the whites to a few families now.
Exactly. That was my issue.
Let's look at countries like Tanzania, that had a very, very good and successful land distribution, especially in Zanzibar. There was a very successful land distribution policy and practice after the fall of the Sultan. Yes, after the revolution. So now getting back to Russia, like he did say that Russians, whether it is Putin, whether it is Medvedev, whether it's any other leader coming, they have never come to terms with the fact that USSR is no more.
It's no more.
Actually, every Russian, it's their wish that actually USSR is back and they are that power that they used to be.
This is where you suspended. I think we are going to a break. I was carrying out that submission. Now, the hangover, I actually called it the hangover. The Russian hangover is nursed by the 2 individuals, 2 strong men, whom the Western Europe and America call all sorts of names, but we also know what they are elsewhere. And that is senior comrade
Medvedev,
Putin and Medvedev.
Yes.
For them, when they came from the missions that they were engaged in, and they took on the reins of leadership in Russia, their motive was one, to bring back the former glory of Russia.
The reunification.
Yes, the reunification of Russia. Either using soft means, persuasion, and where it fails, going outright to bring back the physical, pieces of lands and the leadership. Now, I was also telling the viewers that